I don't have to swear. I don't have to say anything but the truth. There is God, and God is. I heard his voice. He spoke. He spoke and he said, love on earth must be.
Love was unique.
Love was just phenomenal.
Love was 5 uniquely talented individuals.
Love is everybody's group.
I'd like to understand just why I feel like I have been through hell, but you tell me I haven't even started yet. To live here, you've got to give more than you get. That's I know, but I said it's alright. I'd like to understand today, then maybe I would know who I was when it was yesterday. The seasons and the reasons are on display, and I know
Know anything about God?
There's this legend of love and the legend of Arthur Lee.
You know anything about the devil?
He has a voice that I just don't understand.
You know anything about myths?
He doesn't want to be a rock and roll star. He wants to be a songwriter.
You know anything about reality?
He was a true genius.
throw it away, throw it again.
They were the top band. They were the top dog.
This area took that one group to heart and made it its own.
LA was an extraordinary city at that time. It was the freest place in the world.
There's no reason why this group should not have gone all the way.
Love's music kind of exposed a little bit of the dark underbelly of paranoia and the Vietnam War, and it's not all peace and love.
When it came time to do the third album, you had a band who couldn't play their instruments.
The drugs were there, people around us were bringing the drugs to us, and we used the drugs.
The world keeps changing, and I just happened to make an album called Forever Changes.
I don't know how anybody has beat that record. It's one of the greatest records ever.
It sounded truthful, and it sounded like it was from the street, and they lived it.
It's the nearest anything musical is coming to changing my life.
Nothing lasts forever, and my group is a part of nothing, I guess, because it didn't last.
Music is a very special gift, and if you don't devote yourself to it, then it will definitely leave you.
At least 10 different ways to tell this story. I'm gonna tell you something. If I blink right now, I'm telling a lie. If I blink right now, I'm telling the truth. Every single morning of my life, when I woke up, my aunt had on blues or jazz or some kind of music. It was just, man, that's what I woke up to music, you know? She'd have Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters. She'd have all, this was in the late 40s, you know what I mean? She'd have all these different people. She was a music freak. She didn't play an instrument, but she liked to have a good time. And the thing about it is, I'd hear so many different styles of music, and when I hummed along with it, it was the same thing that they were doing, no matter what kind of music it was, you know? And that's my gift, variety. I was born in Memphis, but I wasn't raised in Memphis. I was basically raised in LA. I left when I was 5 years old. I was raised by my mother until the age of 5, and she remarried. My stepfather, he adopted me. My name was Taylor, Arthur Taylor, and he changed it to Lee through the adoption papers and stuff, so I've been Arthur Lee ever since, you know. I grew up real quick. I grew up, and I never liked hanging around kids my age. I was wild in the streets, you know, tough guy, bully, da-da-da, whatever. I I was an only child, so I had to fight my way to school, fight my way back sometimes.
Well, I was brought up in Los Angeles, I guess called the west side of Los Angeles, and 2 doors down from Arthur. Our family goes back to before we were even born. From Memphis, my grandmother and his mother were friends. They were both school teachers. And we were born in the same hospital, as a matter of fact. I was about 8 or 9 when we moved. And just coincidentally, we ended up moving a few doors down from each other. And we hit it off again right away.
You see that big round, that oval-shaped building over there? Well, that's their gymnasium. That's where I broke the Dorsey High School basketball record.
Hummingbirds hum, what do they hum? Little girls wearing pigtails.
That's Susan Miller Dorsey. Who the hell is Susan Miller?
One day we were having show and tell in school, and there was this gentleman or kid, his name was Danny Oken, and he brought a guitar to class. And for some reason, he had to go to the nurse's office, and he asked me to take care of the guitar. And so I'm holding his guitar and I'm strumming it. It was a Harmony Sovereign. And it was just electrifying, just the feeling of the guitar. It kind of was like tickling your soul, basically. It's like, I would imagine that's how God feels, you know, to feel the vibrations. It's such a fantastic feeling, the guitar, that I just fell in love with it.
I know when I got started is when I saw Johnny Echols in a high school assembly playing the guitar. I'm saying to myself, interesting, you know what I mean? It really blew my mind.
I saw all of the girls, you know, they were coming after us and, you know, waiting in line to talk to us. And, you know, that was a first, you know, from being shunned and all of a sudden being, you know, the center of attention. So right away, you know, we saw this was our ticket.
Now, I'm trying to break the high school record in basketball and all of that. And all these athletical things that people are like they're twice the size I am. And it's gonna be a problem here. I don't want a problem. You know what I mean? I know how to play this instrument, and I made up in my mind that I was going to become a musician.
We got a group together with Arthur playing bongo drums, and then Arthur switched over to keyboards. We would play bar mitzvahs and weddings, funerals, whatever they needed the music for, we were there.
That's when I started my march towards Capitol Records, because I wasn't going to be a failure mate, but I wasn't going to be a doctor, a lawyer, an Indian chief either. Like my mother thought that that's the way life goes. Good, be a doctor, da-da-da-da-da. You know what? Something just don't ring right here, moms. You know what I mean? I'll show you how I used to leave. There's a gate down here. That's the administration building. There used to be no cop cars here, no metal detectors, none of that stuff. And this is where I rode hummingbirds hum, where we turned around back there. Why do they hum? Little girls wearing pigtails. But there used to be a guy here, he was called a safety. He used to let me out of this gate right there, and I'd start my walk to the Capitol building. So I took from here, that street there, down this street, Farmdale, all the way down this street to Crenshaw. Once I heard the sound out of that auditorium and the roar from the crowd, it was more than breaking the school record back there. It was more than running track and winning first place in that. It was just, I just felt something, man, and I knew I can do this, you know? So I started my walk.
Did you do this after school, Arthur, or?
No, I did it during school. I did school to do this. It was all rubbish, actually, because I learned at home. My mother was a school teacher. Her aunt was a principal. My mother's sister's a school teacher for 55 years. My cousins are all school teachers. Jesus Christ, I couldn't wait to get out of school. I'm not saying everybody drop out, tune in, turn on, drop. I'm saying go to school and learn a trade and do something that you like to do if you can find that. Make a go of it, man, and don't let go. I haven't let go. Since I started this walk in 1963 or 2. 1962 or 3, something like that. And this is what, 2005, and I'm still walking. Trying to find that way.
How far's the walk after? About 9 miles?
I don't know, but I didn't care. Just as long as I got there and somebody listened to my tape that I made on my little 2-track, whatever, recorder. At that time, they didn't have security cards at the desk. So I'd look on the wall and I'd read the wall and I'd see different names and I'd just pick a name and see if I could go up the elevator to that place and knock on the door and see if they were interested in a young black man like me. The end of the street here is Wilshire Boulevard, the so-called Miracle Mile or whatever the hell. Quite a difference when you cross Wilshire of the look of the houses and the whole bit. Look at these fucking houses. You know what I mean? That's a house. Jesus Christ, it looks like the fucking castle thing. I'd walk through here. They were all white. Everybody was white. I walked through here, a little black boy walking through here. Nobody bothered me. They didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I didn't care less of what they're doing. Probably writing songs along the way, thinking about it. Thinking about the group, thinking of how I could put a group together. It's my first experience. And when I got signed to Capitol Records, it just was the thrill of my life. Because Nat King Cole was on Capitol. Everything's cool about the record, but the music, I don't like the music. So I wasn't going to give him my best music. I was going to give him my second best to see if they cheated me out of my money or I got paid, you know what I mean? At 15, I was thinking like that. And at 60, I'm thinking like that. This is Hollywood and Vine. And this was my final destination. I go in here, into the Capitol building, and knock on people's doors until someone listened to me. And that's about the extent of my that was my rendezvous, right? Then I'd have to walk all the way back home.
Now, we're still in school, right? Okay, we'd start Friday night, we'd play a frat party, and then at 4 in the morning, we'd go to Cappy's and play all night until about noon, go home, get a little sleep, go back, play another fraternity party, and play an after-hours club again.
Johnny and I used to back up all the bands, the old Jays, this one's, the that one's, the cross-dressers, now they call them the homosexuals, men and, wore dresses and fooled people as being women, whatever.
And that was with Billy and Arthur and me and Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy James then, and Alan Talbert and Fleckenstein.
We didn't really have a manager, an agent at that time. Arthur just kind of handled all of these, he handled just all of that. He acted as manager, agent, got us bookings and different jobs. We did some very strange jobs. I mean, I remember we played at a place down on Western and what is now Martin Luther King Boulevard. And they weren't going to pay us or pay us right. And so Arthur got into a confrontation. The first time I ever saw a gun come out. And the manager pulled out a gun, and Arthur, I guess, still confronted him. And whatever happened, we ended up getting our money. So he must have done a good job there. We kind of let Arthur handle all of that.
Arthur and myself would do recording sessions with Delphi, with Richie Valens' label. We were like the house songwriting team, rhythm section, guitar players for them, so we did just about everything with them. We were like old hands, like we'd been playing for decades when we were still kids.
The first place that we really had a standing gig was at a place called the Beverly Bowl, which was out in God knows where. It was out in El Monte or someplace. And that's where we kind of honed things and got things together. And at that point, that's when I brought in Don Conca and introduced him to Arthur, which Arthur's either very happy about or very unhappy about, I don't know.
He was just a fantastic drummer. He was sort of like a Max Roach, Gene Krupa type drummer, and he had his own following. He had an entourage that would follow him around just to hear him play. He was that good.
A lot of drummers and a lot of people used to see him come and do his thing, man. They used to see him flipping them sticks and the crossovers and the different things he do. He'd take a fucking hour solo. Yeah.
From the Beverly Bowl, that's when we went over and played at the Brave New World.
That's where Brian came into the picture, at the Brave New World.
I used to hang around with the Byrds. They were like his idols. And he wanted to be in the band, but he became a roadie, you know.
The Byrds were a powerful group then. They were the #1 group in Hollywood. They had the crowd, and it was an incredible scene. The whole art crowd was there. You know, Vito and Carl and Vito Sue and all of these people. The dance floor was just packed with these. They weren't hippies, you know. They were art students and they were artists, and they were having a good time. And so, you know, all the bands in Hollywood wanted that crowd to be in their club.
That was basically the reason that we hooked up with Brian, because Brian, being a roadie with the Byrds, he had access to a lot of these people. And when Brian became part of the group, they came along too.
Well, the Tambourine Man tour ended. Byrds stayed in England to hang out with the Beatles. I came back to LA, and there was a void. And in Ben Frank's parking lot, I met up with this guy, Arthur Lee, and he was interesting type.
Whatever he was doing, I said, wow, this guy, it seems like he'd be interesting to have in the band. He had long locks of red hair and freckles and striped pants and this and a scarf around the neck. I said, I'm saying to myself, shit.
I actually met Arthur. His car was stopped here. I got in and he pulled in right here. And I needed to get somewhere. I don't remember what it was. I needed to be someplace. And we all got out and stood out and talked to each other, and then jumped back in the car, and he drove me wherever I was going. He had a little silver blue Corvair that he drove for years. And later on I found out that he was in a band, and I auditioned and I was in the band within a week, I think.
It was a very, very good sounding group then. And wherever we played, we would fill the places. And so we thought at that point it was ready to go.
Well, I guess we'd kind of be a pretty big group in Hollywood as the Grassroots. And then all of a sudden, there was a record released by a group called the Grassroots, a record called something Bob Dylan wrote, I don't know. But anyway, that blew my cool because I didn't have my name registered or anything, you know. And the vibration that I got wasn't very good. So instead of reacting in the normal way that I would if someone stole something from me, I chose to do just the opposite, which was love. So that's how I got the name of the group, or I thought of the name of the group.
Have you been able to live up to it, do you think?
Well, I found out that everybody was love, and I was just a part of love.
My very first experience of love was when I stumbled into a club called Beto Litos. It was near Shelley's Manhole, where we saw Coltrane and Miles Davis. And here was this group, and they were deafeningly loud, and they were mixed racially, and my mind was blown, to use a 60s term.
It was like the Black Hole of Calcutta with a door charge, but what was great about it was the music and the people, and there was everybody. Every kind of freak you could imagine, and some people who were just gorgeous.
It was the early flowering hippie scene, you know, lots of scantily clad young girls, and I was a teenager, and that was very stimulating. Opened my eyes. I wanted to leave home immediately.
This was Love's answer to the Cavern Club. We played here 7 nights a week, and wouldn't matter whether it was Monday or Saturday night, it was always full. Over here is where the stage was, and this is where the group played. All this area in here was dance floor. It was raucous, it was loud. The guitars would be bouncing off of all these walls, and so you had a huge sound. You could do some damage to your ears.
People talk about the way I look. I think I'm always said I gotta live to write a book. But don't they know?
Everybody would look at Love and they would see something special.
It was sort of a minor Beatle thing in its own little way here, where, you know, each member had his own little fan base.
Let me play it one time now.
We were the best band in Hollywood. We were the most different band in Hollywood. I had the first integrated rock group. I mean, as good as the Beatles were, the 4 white boys. As good as the Rolling Stones are, they got a black bass player. We finally picked up on something. That's a little different, but it's meaningless.
Here we've got a psychedelic black man, which sort of like what Hendrix did a little later, which was so outside the box of African American, you know, and it's, you know, thrilling when those boundaries are crossed.
It was very unusual. The riots were going on in Los Angeles. That was a huge thing. I mean, Compton was just trash.
I thought it was a beautiful sight to see, you know, just musicians. It didn't matter what color you were, you know, you were just great musicians, and these guys were just fantastic. Every time they played, there was a line down the street.
That became like a street fair. There was more action going on outside the club than was going in.
Okay, we're at Cosmo's Alley. You know, if you can notice down there, that's about 100 yards is the end of the alley. That was blocked off. And then they blocked this off, and they would have these Voice of the Theater speakers here. That would be some down there and across the street. And people would pay to get in here because this was an alley. It was a private street, basically, so they could block it off. And people paid admission just for the honor of dancing. They didn't get to see the group or anybody inside, but they were part of the festivities anyway. It was a spontaneous thing. Nobody said, hey, everybody come over here. They all came here because something was happening, and it was the beginning of a movement.
What is happening and how have you been? Gotta go, but I'll see you again. And oh, the music is so loud. And then I fade into the...
I'm glad that I was raised in a life and helped create what they call the 60s. Because that's when it was happening. That's when, if the shirt on your back and it's cold outside, and you can stand here and I can go outside with this shirt, you gave me a shirt. If I had it, you had it.
From 65 to 67, 2 years, that little window, that was the sort of possibly naive but hopeful sort of sense that we were taken over.
Obsolete. Then you go back across the street. Yeah. Street.
It was something completely new, and it embodied the way you looked, the way you perceived, what you thought, and what you were. Everything changed. And the ones that were here early were on the spearhead of a social revolution.
this country was changing. The civil rights movement was happening, and the colleges were in an uproar over things happening, and what they considered, or what we all considered, was the hypocrisy of the times. And so the music, it was a catharsis. It was something that allowed you to get away from the reality in which you lived. And it was also something that you could relate to people next to you. You could like look at a person and know that this person was like you by just the way they dressed or the way their hair was or just the manner of speech. You knew this was a kindred spirit. And we were here for quite some time. Up until the time we did our first album, we stayed until it got to be prohibitive, because even though they had the Cosmos Alley, it was still not enough room for all the people that would come out to see Love concerts or Love gigs or whatever.
When we were at Beto Litos, I had an opportunity to get into the Cinematographers Guild. I really didn't want to, but I had to take that at that time.
I walk into Beto Litos down on Cosmo Alley in Hollywood. Guess who was there? Arthur Lee. Oh, jeez. Arthur Lee, Brian McLean, and this drummer they call Don Conca. He said, "Sounds like you need a bass player." Meet me up here next Saturday at Beto Litos, right? So I showed up. I had all my shit together. I had the amp, I had the bass, I had everything. You know what they did? They rolled a joint and dragged me up to Arthur's house. You're in. That's how it happened.
And then Snoopy got in because he got in?
Snoopy got in because Don Conca was always out to here on drugs. Yeah.
Don was just having problems making the gigs, and he was falling further and further into the hole that drugs will allow or help you to dig for yourself. And so he just became a casualty of drugs. And so we had to get someone that was dependable, who was going to be there at all times. And so we ended up, of all people, Alban Pfisterer.
Snoopy, he was a straight cat in the band. He was a square. Nobody liked him but me. I loved him, you know what I mean? I loved you, Snoopy. A bit confused. Who isn't?
I was the odd man out. I was what do you call it? A compromise, basically, the whole time. It wasn't a great experience for me, actually. I was going to art school with Kenny Forsey. That's how I ended up in a group. When they needed a drummer, when Don Conca didn't show up, basically, they would call me on the spot. I was doing my homework. Hey, could you come down to Beto Litos and sit in with us? Sure. That was like my dream. I knew those guys were going to make it. So I went down there and did this, and this basically started to happen kind of regularly. At the time that our first album was being recorded, I was the drummer. They tried other drummers, but Arthur, as you know, is not an easy guy to get along with. So basically they said, F you. And they came back to their last choice, me.
Elektra was a folk music label. I mean, if you had to give it a characteristic, it was started in October of 1950, and we just did whatever we wanted to do, but we stayed mostly within folk, because folk was an easy genre to record, not expensive, and because every performance was very distinctive. When we finished doing the Butterfield Blues Band, which was a departure for us, we had never done any electric music before, that took me into another area of expectation. I wanted more of that. And when Butterfield backed Dylan at the 1965 famous or infamous, depending upon your point of view, folk festival, at which Dylan went electric, the little hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I said, now I know where I'm going. And one night in 1965, at a club called Beto Litos, I saw a band named Love. There was a kind of a sense of relief I felt, because I finally found my group, if I could only get them. And that's what led to an entire adventure with Arthur Lee and Love.
It was a chance and a risk. Now that I have a chance to look back on the situation, we were an integrated band. At that time, they would show a picture or something someone sketched or drew rather than an integrated group, because it was a chance, you know what I mean, that they would lose their money. And so they wanted to be safe and say segregated. But Jack Holzman or someone had the nerve to have the first integrated group. So the man can't be all good, can he?
We thought it would work out because we'd have a record company that was behind us rather than 40, 50 different acts. This was one that was in our corner. And initially, it was a good idea.
We quickly came to a deal. It was a $5,000 advance, which in those days was a fair amount of money. But Arthur wanted cash, so I said, no problem, meet me at a bank, I'll get you cash. And the band all come over with Arthur. Arthur takes the $5,000 and says to the band, I gotta go somewhere. And Arthur disappears. Arthur shows up several hours later with a Mercedes Gullwing that would seat two, and gives each of the band members $100 because the car had cost $4,500. I didn't understand how a Mercedes Gullwing was going to handle 5 artists because Arthur, as brilliant as he was a little weak on cubic content.
My first involvement with Love came through Jack Holzman asking around Los Angeles where to record a new band that he had just signed. And it was the first time they had recorded in Los Angeles as well, because they were a New York-based company. And he came out, interviewed me at Sunset Sound, and brought the band in and produced the first album. They were playing at Beat Alito at the time, and they were really sharp. So they just came in and basically played their set.
People try to tell me what they think is right. I don't listen to them, don't know day from night. I go through life searching, trying to find the one. I go slip, slip, you go slip, slip away.
I've seen bands who are totally democratic and make it work, and they make it work because everybody in that band is as smart as everybody else. It was true of Queen, it was true of The Doors. It wasn't the case of Love.
No, it was Arthur's show, always Arthur's show. Arthur was in charge, but he did it in a very sweet manner. You know, and if anybody got out of line, and he would just quietly make it happen.
He was so smart, so talented, so able to play everybody's instrument better than they could play. And someone who really agonized over his lyrics, although rumor was that he just sort of tossed them off, which I don't think he did.
Problems. All I had was you. Guess I'll keep on searching and try to find the one. 'Cause I go slip, slip, you go slip, slip away. And I don't need you to help me find my way. I can make it if I just don't see your face.
To me, Arthur is a poet first. He should be poet laureate for this country because the man can look at just a mundane situation and he can find something interesting in it, or he can find a word or a twist of phrase like, for everyone that thinks that life is such a game, Do you like the part you're playing? I mean, just think of that, you know, that just tells you everything you need to know about a person, you know. A guy that's a bus driver or another one that's a president of a Fortune 500 company. Is he happy with the role that's been written for him and the part that he's playing in this game?
Jesus said, all these things shall pass, but my words shall never pass. Well, I want to be, my music will never pass, you know, because I pick subjects that happen every day. I pick subjects, war. I pick subjects, death. I pick subjects, man and woman getting along, whatever.
Brian and Arthur had a very interesting relationship with each other, and I'm not so sure that either really appreciated or fully understood what the other offered. Arthur offered Brian approval and an opportunity. Brian offered something that Arthur really needed, which was a kind of leavening of the intensity. It took the scope of the albums and opened it up. The horizons were not tight, didactic rock and roll. It suddenly was expansive, and that came from whom Brian was.
I could love you more and more each day for a million years. Then I'd sit around all day just crying happy tears. To dance and sing my life away, laughing with you, my darling, softly to me.
He went places a little bit more romantic and melancholy than Arthur would go. Arthur didn't go to that space, but Arthur recognized how important it was. He liked Brian's melodic sense and what he had to say, and it worked.
Brian was a great songwriter. I thought a great songwriter. It takes a lot for me to say great to anybody.
My goal for my music was always timelessness. I was trying to write and construct music that couldn't necessarily be associated with any particular time, that would still sound good 30 years, 50 years later.
There was a tremendous competitive edge between Arthur and Brian. They both wanted the same things in the group. They both wanted the spotlight, they both wanted the same girls, and they were both able to write songs and sing the songs, and they were great showmen as well. And so all of those things together made the group better, and it made each of them better as well. When they were around each other, they were each as good as they could be.
A Little Red Book was clearly the single.
I saw that in a movie called What's New Pussycat? Tom Jones, whoa, whoa, whoa. And then here comes this song, My Little Red Book.
Well, I just got out my little red book the minute that you said goodbye. I thumbed right through my little red book. I wasn't gonna sit and cry. And I went from A to Z. I took out every pretty girl in town. They danced with me. And as I held them, all I did was talk about you. Hear your name and I start to cry. There's just no getting over you. Oh no.
We started practicing it and doing it a little different.
It was a very slow ballad type song. Arthur put his thing to it, and it turned out to be a whole nother song. A whole nother song.
Please come back. Without your precious love, I can't go on. Where can love be? I need you so much. All I did was talk about you. Hear your name and I start to cry. There's just no getting over you. Oh no.
It was a great experience for me because I had released probably about 30 singles up to that time, but I never heard any of them on the radio. And I'm driving back from a board meeting, and I've tuned to a Baltimore AM radio station, and there's My Little Red Book, bounding through the radio, sounding great. I pulled over to the side of the road and cried. It takes me a long time to get there.
rock version of Little Red Book outsold all of their Little Red Book stuff, you know what I mean? Now Manfred Paul Jones is playing the blues. Don't break my heart, mate. You know, I mean, hey, you can fool some of the people some of the times, most of the people most of the times, but you ain't got the blues. I come from Memphis, Tennessee, where they would take a stick and knock it upside a black man's head. And the black man would ask him, what'd you do that to me for, Mr. Police Officer? He says, I didn't like what you were thinking. That's where I come from, dude.
The album sold about 150,000 over a reasonable period of time, which made it one of our biggest selling albums of all time up until that moment. But what I saw was we had that within the greater Los Angeles community, we'd broken a band, which meant we had bought a ticket to the show. Because other bands would gravitate to wherever a hit band had been successful.
Anybody home?
Here's my baggage, hand me my staff. I'm living in a boat, a plane, a raft. A my love, be a love so hard to choose.
We lived there for about a year, I believe. It may have been a little longer, but it's been a long time.
Everybody knew about it. You know, I mean, it was just a bizarre thing, you know, this group all living in this big, huge castle.
A friend of Brian's was in charge of taking care of the upkeep and all of that. And he came up with an idea that if we paid the taxes and the upkeep, that we could live there.
This was the dining room. This is the living room, it still is. But there was glass going across here. And the fellows used to have roller skates, and they'd roller skate around and about here, into here, and everywhere, actually.
Arthur had invited me to come over to the castle, and when I walked in, you know, he looked up and he gave me a wave, and then he whipped around and was skating backwards, you know, and it was he was quite an accomplished roller skater.
Everybody that came through town, the Jefferson Airplane or Janis Joplin or whomever, would stay there. You know, so it was like the place to be, you know, for groups traveling through Los Angeles that knew us.
I wake up from the bedroom in there, come through those shutter doors and go to the kitchen and meet 5, 10 people, like I said, you know, I'd never seen before, because we never locked the doors. Quite different these days. Now, this is a swimming pool, but at the time there was so much shrubbery or whatever in the way. This was hardly a swimming pool, you know. That's the guest quarters over there. It's the maid's quarters now, but no one lived in there. But upstairs is where Kenny Forsey lived. Don Conker lived downstairs here. And it's quite amazing what they've done to this place. Yeah, this was my living room, my private living room with a fireplace. And this was my bedroom here through these doors. And I come in here and there'd be a naked chick in the bedroom damn near every time. I don't know.
All kinds of debauchery and things went on in there that you would expect a rock group, you know, of our stature and with the type of lifestyle that was available to us at the time, I'll put it that way. So anything you can imagine that would happen at the Playboy Mansion happened at the castle.
But this is Brian's room. And his bed was that way. And they made this arch. And this is just, it's ridiculous if you ask me. If I'm not mistaken, This was Don Conker's room, the Sign DC boy. Place was basically like this, but except it was not as well kept, shall we say, eh? This wasn't facing this way. No. There was a toilet there. And I took a chance and I flushed the toilet. And this green shit shot up through my legs up, hit the ceiling, you know. The bathroom hadn't been flushed in 20, 30 years, I don't think. It was fun times, but I was serious about music. This is where I wrote part of Da Capo, most of Da Capo in this place. But as far as the band, it was a big party house. They really didn't have a clue, I don't think, of what I had on my mind, like Forever Changes or whatever. And, like I said, I could have got this for $50,000 in 1966, going into 1967, and now it's worth $6-7 million. What is it, the furniture or what? I don't get it. Well, more power to people that like places like these. I particularly don't.
I think that time and the time shortly thereafter had to have been the best time in their lives because, you know, Arthur and Brian and all the guys were dedicated to making it, just like every band is. And so you always look at yourself and think, well, when have I made it? You know, that what's happening that lets me think, okay, I'm on my way now. And to those guys, it had to have been living at the castle.
There's no reason why this group should not have gone all the way, except for underlying things that kept us from being able to totally break out. And some of them may have been our fault, but I think a lot of them had to do with the times.
The Vietnam War was raging and polarized the entire country, kind of similar to now. I mean, Iraq has not polarized us that much. Well, the carnage has been censored, you know. We can't even see the American caskets coming back. But then the media helped stop the war. Every night was this stuff on television.
Every time you turn on the TV, it's the war in Vietnam, the war in Vietnam. I shut my television. I called my mother. I said, hey, Mother, shut the television. She said, why did you do that? Didn't it have an on and off switch? She says things that really penetrate, you know what I mean?
There was a lot of things happening outside of this little enclave that we had created for ourselves here in Hollywood. It was like our little fairyland. And as long as we stayed here, everything was okay, we were safe. But when we left, you know, that's when the real world kind of crept in.
Call my name. I hear you calling my name. Yeah.
I think it was during Forever Changes that I got called. And luckily I had a bad back and x-rays and all, and I was deferred. But I seem to remember the guys terrified.
Arthur, for sure, helped prep me for my, I don't know if this should be on tape actually, but basically we all got out of the service. And mine was, I was insane actually. I actually flipped out on acid the day before the induction physical. Arthur was with me actually. We both went over the edge. We took like 1,500 mics, which is 6 dosages. So when it came to going to the psychiatrist, basically I couldn't fill in the forms. I had actually let my fingernails grow. I went with my zipper open. I was filthy. I was barefooted. And I went in there to look the part that this is not somebody that you want in your service. And so they gave me this special nurse to take me to the beginning of every line. And they would put these earphones and say, which side do you hear the sound coming out of? Take those earphones, they basically, I can't hear. Then they told me to follow the yellow line into another part of the thing. I followed the blue line into another office. Then they looked at my application, it says here you've been to University of the Pacific and Art Center School. And I said, yeah. And they just laughed. Get back out in the streets where you belong. All right.
We were kind of iconoclastic, not kind of, we were iconoclastic, we were rebellious, we were druggies, we were everything that they didn't want at all in the armed services. So they were better off and we were better off. But nevertheless, we were still frightened that they were going to, at some point, need bodies and ours were going to be the ones sent.
By the time that I'm through singing, the bells from the schools of walls will be ringing. More confusions, blood transfusions. The news today will be the movies for tomorrow. And the waters turn to blood. And if you don't think so, go turn on your tub. And if it's mixed with mud, you see it turn to gray. Then you can call my name. I hear you calling my name.
I think circumstances, life itself, and just serendipity all came together and kept us from, being part of that. But it still was there. It was always an undercurrent. And like on House is Not a Motel, I remember we were up in San Francisco at the Warehouse, I believe. Janis Joplin is on stage squalling, that loud voice, that boozy voice, and there's this guy that's just come back from Vietnam, and he's talking to us about what's happening over there, and he's telling the story about blood turning to gray as it's mixed with the mud and all of this, and we're listening to this, and he's, just one step away from, blowing it. But he's also a very fascinating person to listen to. And I'm listening to the story everybody is, but Arthur's mind is working differently. He's writing a song from the story that this guy is telling us about the war, and that's how that came about. And it's the true story of that horrible, sad, I can't think of anything worse and better than sad to say about that war. People died that shouldn't have died, and kids lost their lives and legs and limbs, and for what?
I was talking with Arthur about doing the next record, and he said, I don't have to do another record with you. I said, well, I don't want to point to a contract, but we had made an agreement.
We wanted out because the first album didn't sound the way it sounded to us in the studio. And when they played it for us, we didn't like it. We didn't like the fact that they weren't promoting us nearly as well as we had expected. And we just were not happy with Elektra, and we wanted out, and we were too young to be signing contracts anyway, so we had decided that we were going to split.
He said, I was under 21 when I made that agreement. So he was legally not emancipated, and he could walk away from the contract. Meanwhile, his lawyer, Al Schlesinger, who had the good taste to be appropriately embarrassed, and said, Jack, I knew nothing about this. And I believed him, because you would never look at Arthur Lee, who had imbibed his share of substances, ever think he was under 21.
They took for granted just straight away. They looked at me and thought I was 26, 30 years old. And I wasn't 17 or 18, 19 years old tops.
And so I met with Arthur. I gave him a larger advance and increased the royalty. And he re-signed. And this time I said, Arthur, I want to take a Xerox of your driver's license, and I want you to initial it, and we're stapling it to the contract, which he did. Either before or after that, we recorded 7 and 7 Is, which was a standalone track.
Well, 7 and 7 Is and A Message to Pretty. I used to call my girlfriend when I was 16 years old, 15 years old, Pretty. So this is A Message to Pretty. And 7 and 7 Is, she's born on the 7th. Anita Billings, she's born on the 7th of March, and I was born on the 7th of March. So I thought it was a perfect match.
I produced that one, and I went into the studio, and it was mayhem. It was difficult to record, it was difficult to listen to in the studio, and it was blessedly short.
When I was a boy, I thought about the times I'd be a man. I'd sit inside a bottle and pretend that I was in a can. In my lonely room, I'd sit my mind in an ice cream cone. You can throw me if you wanna, 'cause I'm a bone and I go boop, bip, bip, boop, bip, bip, yeah.
We did over 40 takes on this thing. The drummer, Snoopy Pfisterer, wasn't really up to the job all the time.
7 to 7 is? Oh, it was a bitch, actually. I don't know if you, I think it's written on all the sleeves, actually, that it took me I don't know how many takes to get it down.
He and Arthur would alternate because this was a non-stop, rat-a-tat-tat, almost menacing burst of rhythmic energy.
It looked like I wasn't going to be able to do it, actually. And so he tried it. He couldn't do it. I mean, as much as he thinks he's a drummer, he couldn't do it any better. I played it, but yeah, it took me a few takes.
Normally, the sound is kind of an afterthought. The sound was the medium that, was driving the show. And that was what was so hard to get across to those guys, is it has to sound like this, otherwise it will be a different song.
Basically, it was hard. And yet it was the best-selling single they ever had. I'm very proud of it now, but I must tell you, I hadn't lost any of my hearing until that day. I came out of that studio somewhat worn down.
It took so long to get them to do that song right, and it shouldn't have, because it's not a difficult song, it's just a chaotic song.
That song blew my mind. I couldn't believe it, because I had a background in classical music. And when I heard 7 to 7 is, that's what I heard. I heard great classical writing. It was powerful, and it was something unique. So I kind of wanted to be a part of that. I thought 7 to 7 is would be something I would have been proud to play on.
We came to realize that in order to push ourselves to that next level, we needed a drummer that could really play, and so we got Mike Stewart.
On one occasion, I'll never forget this. It's such a humiliating experience. We were playing at Beatolitos, and My Little Red Book, I don't know if you know, but it actually has the beat on the back side. It's not like a regular song. And I used to regularly screw that up when we came back in. There's a break and then it comes back in. So Arthur said to me, "Hey man, if you screw up that My Little Red Book tonight, you might as well just pack your shit and go home." So what do you think happened that night? Yeah. I fucked it up, and everybody turned around in the band and looked at me, and I was like wanting to sink through the floor. What's the point of that? Just part of my experience with the group. Well, that's when they finally, like I said, Arthur and I were friendly, and he wanted me to be around him, basically, I think. And he tried to accommodate me and make use of my piano skills.
Having Snoopy play his harpsichord, then the group had changed, it shifted a little bit. And Jay Contrelli had been part of that lineup that played over at the other places on the west side of California and Nightlife. And Jay added a lot to the sound of it, his flute and saxophone. So it was kind of an experiment that worked for a while.
At that time, I don't know that Love was performing like they did on the first album, because the first album is truly a document of a performing band. And by the time Da Capo rolled around, they were starting to become more of a studio band, where things were starting to get written and not necessarily played before coming into the studio.
We went up to Arthur's house up in the canyon, and he just started going over the songs on his acoustic Gibson. And they were great songs, but they were totally different than what had appeared on the first album.
Da Capo? What's that mean? You know what? When I thought of Da Capo, I thought it meant the end back to the beginning. That's what da capo means, isn't it? Yeah. So you go to the second line, right? From the beginning to the end, and back to the beginning. That's what da capo means, I think. I'm not a Frenchman, but that's what I think.
Change of producer at that point. Paul Rothchild was available, and I thought that Paul would take them places. I was good at bringing out the best of what they have, but Paul would be able to go an additional distance and show them what could be. The second side is one long kind of 20-minute jam.
We used to do that on stage just fluently and naturally, and it was great, you know. When we got in the studio, this guy had a grudge against this guy.
We were pissed off and in a bad mood because I was ready to take Brian out that night, and I don't even know why.
I didn't need anybody in the studios. I don't know what went on between them and their transactions and their things, but the feeling was, Jesus Christ, it was the worst feeling I ever went in the studio with. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe what happened to you guys. I'm not here to babysit you. You know what I mean? What's this vibe about? I mean, you could feel it.
When you're in my bed, baby, I feel so good. Can you give me a little?
The thing that was great about it is that it made use of the freedom that the LP format gave you. Here is a band that said, let's see what we can do with this technology. Look at all of the room it gives us. Let's just go.
That's the worst fucking song I've ever done in my life.
At the time, I really couldn't figure it out. You know, I mean, I thought, well, we had some great songs on side A, and then one song on side B.
In the second album, for some reason, we got derailed, and put that big, huge, long song on the other side, which is a shame. There's a lot of other stuff we could have done that would have been better. And it just, when it came time to what we were going to do on a specific album, Arthur had, the veto power.
Orange skies, carnivals and cotton candy, and you, and I love you too, I do.
Brian would have a full album full of songs to record and ready to go, but they weren't songs that necessarily anybody wanted to buy or hear. People want to hear music that relates to them, that relates to the times and to their day-to-day experiences, and not about pie-in-the-sky things, because that's just not honest. We weren't living a pie-in-the-sky life. That's not the way it was. And so writing about that, chocolate-covered rainbows, that's beautiful. Those are wonderful sentiments. But they're not real, they're not honest, and they would not have been who we were. So they were rejected, and he became kind of embittered by that, but that's reality.
Brian McLean, Brian was a handful, man. To me, I would seem, and I think he would probably say the same things, that Arthur was a handful. Arthur has something to do in his life, and I picked you because I thought you could help Arthur's dream, not because I really needed you, man.
It was an interesting record, and it was a successful record, but it was a transitional record, and I had no idea where they were going to go next.
It got to be unwieldy having 7 people. It changed the focus a little bit more than either of us wanted it. So that experiment lasted about a year or so, and then we moved back to the other lineup, except we kept Mike Stewart.
So basically, my road to stardom was pretty well finished there.
I also had a feeling that Rothchild also thought of this as an interim album. The fact that he couldn't make the next album had to do strictly with me telling him that we've been touched by the good fairy, And we have this smash act beginning to shape up, namely the Doors.
Jim, just about every time I saw him, would ask, to get hooked up with Elektra, because they saw us with Elektra. Our level of success was something that they coveted. They thought that was just the greatest thing, and they wanted that. And we kept saying that, there's more than this, but that's what he wanted.
Best thing I ever saw Morrison do was sock Brian McLean in the mouth. That was quite a sight for me. I like that one because that's what I wanted to do.
I kept putting him off. I kind of hemmed and hawed and never introduced him, but Arthur did. He thought that's what he should do.
The interesting thing is that in a way, Arthur sealed his own fate, because I went to a club, the Whiskey, one night, very late, gotten in at 11 o'clock off of a New York flight, and went to the club to say hi to Arthur and to catch a bit of a set. And he said, stick around because there's a band you ought to hear. And any band that Arthur respected, I was going to give a close listen to. And I stayed and I saw the Doors, and interesting but not impressive.
He didn't like him at all. It's not up to you to like. Who made you judge? The people love him. He went back. I said, go back down there.
But I kept going back, and on the fourth night I got it. I mean, everything sort of gelled. It came together in a way that even a tired New Yorker would get it, and that's when I approached the band.
The reason we were very excited about signing with Elektra was because they had Love and the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. And those two groups were like kicking. And we thought, man, this is good company.
That band worked totally differently. That band was tightly integrated. Decisions were made as a group. There was no oppression. Everybody shared in the copyrights, which was not true in the case of Love. It was a system and a brotherhood, and it worked.
We hoped to be as big as Love. I thought, wow, that'd be something. And then, we rocketed past them.
They were more, I'm trying to put this a delicate way, the sensibilities of the American record buyer was more easily assuaged by the melanin content of that particular group than the ones that we were. So it was easier to sell them, in other words, than it was to sell us.
There were certain things that the Doors did, including the willingness to tour, that Arthur didn't do, and that's probably what happened. Was Arthur as talented as any member of the Doors? You bet he was.
We were really willing to work hard. We worked, my God, we went to LAX Thursday and came back Sunday and played clumped clusters like Florida area, the South, every weekend for years. And it got pretty tiring, but you can't beat that as far as promotion. We played everywhere.
The album was selling very, very steadily. It took about 3 to 4 months. We were selling about 10,000 albums a month. And then one month we sold 250,000 albums.
By then we were so fed up that, the group was ready to go, because we had tried to get them to do the right thing, and they chose not to. And they chose to rub our faces in it by spending our money on another group. And that was, especially one that we brought to them, So there was a lot of bad feelings, Not with the Doors. They were always, cool with us, and we were always friends, but with Elektra.
Sitting on a hillside, watching all the people die. I'll feel much better on the other side of the moon.
We started working on Forever Changes just a few months after we finished Da Capo. And there was kind of a little discord because, as I said before, the more successful you get, the more you start picking at each other. And there was little political moves and machinations going on back and forth. Brian still wanted to have more of his songs done, and it just wasn't the same feelings. There wasn't the same camaraderie anymore.
There was a tremendous amount of separation with members of the group by that time. We just associated with each other when we got together to play and record and travel, and that was it.
It's very hard, you know, when one of the band members starts to take the spotlight, and the reality is he's the songwriter and he's the lead singer and he's the arranger and so on and so forth. He is love. It was Arthur was love.
Life goes on here, day after day. I don't know if I am living or if I'm supposed to be. Sometimes my life is so eerie, and if you think I'm happy, paint me yellow.
My band had no idea of what I was doing when I did Forever Changes. They had no idea of the expectations that were to follow. They had no idea that I was recognized in the world with my music as the way it was. They just wanted to prop and lay there nodding and farting.
Forever Changes, the songs were multi-dimensional and they needed a lot of work and a lot of preparation. And so the fact that we had difficulty with those songs is understandable, considering the limited rehearsal time, the limited playing time.
We rehearsed 3 songs to go in the studio, and the band just didn't cut it. And Arthur was screaming at everybody, trying to get them to wake up.
I tried real hard, man, for my band to stick together. But how are you gonna play when you're asleep? How are you gonna play in the studio? I'm gonna have to shake you and wake you up.
I seem to remember reading somewhere that that 7 and 7 Is took something like 30 takes to get the foundation track right. And I'm not sure, but I think that we didn't try 30 times to get that first track right before it was decided we should take a little break. And Arthur got together with a few people back behind the glass.
I fired the band and brought in all Hollywood studio musicians, mainly that were playing for Phil Spector and Jack Nitzsche, to play 3 cuts. And I remember the guys were there in the control room, and there were tears on their face.
But when the studio people tried to play like us, they had a hard time. They played too squeaky clean. You know, our sound had, in some ways, had a hard edge to it, and studio people don't play with a hard edge. They play the notes right there, you know, because that's how they make their living. And so I think that in some ways that restricted their ability to play the music the way it was supposed to be played. And so, you know, that was fortunate for us.
And then afterwards they came to me and they said, we'll get it together, we'll show you. And they did. And I have to hand it to them that they were able to come back from it and say, I'm not going to be taken down by this, I'm going to do it.
I think we all knew that we could do it. We just needed another chance. Well, the word was from the beginning that there would be horns and strings brought in.
From the very beginning, it was known that there was going to be an orchestra and that the songs were going to be different than the ones that we had done before.
Never went in with the concept of even putting strings and horns on it. That was never a part of it to the end, and that was my idea.
Everybody takes credit for doing that, and I don't know who gets the laurel wreath. But once the decision was made to add the strings and horns, Arthur was right in there. He worked very closely with the arranger to get that stuff.
I had these songs in my mind, and I was determined to do what I was going to do. I knew all the orchestra parts. I just sort of needed someone to help me arrange the things that I did on that Forever Change. The guy's name was David Angel.
When we met, it just, somehow it was almost as though we'd been together already. You know, it hit right off. We went right to work. It was magic in a way because nobody knew exactly what would happen. So we were relying on each other, but we were young enough to believe in that. We got together every day and spent hours, and they didn't tell me what to write. They weren't trying to get something from a technical orchestrator. They were trying to get me to feel something or belong to this music. And Arthur would sit there, for instance, and play on the piano and really work on his song as though he hadn't finished it yet. And yet he knew I was next to him, but he just wanted me to feel what he was doing. And he would play the song over and over, and sometimes he'd hit a note, like in the middle of a phrase, and look at me, and I'd notate that he liked that note, you know. But it wasn't that we sat there talking and working like, oh, should we do that? He just played and played, and hours would go by, and I'd just absorb it. And that's what he wanted.
Rather than just adding strings, if you listen to the songs, you can see where certain parts that were played, he would complement that by playing the same part, except with strings and horns. And so they fit in perfectly rather than just putting Muzak in it, like on some albums you hear. It's just like an afterthought. It wasn't that way. It was a coherent part of the song.
Arthur, he was like to me, he was like a symphony composer. He created an idea, and it had to live. It didn't have to be pretty. It just had to live. But with Brian, it was more direct. It was easier to understand. And what knocked me out in his songs was the unexpected. You know, he could throw something at you didn't expect it to be in that song. And yet, it fit perfectly. This was a very fortunate combination, these two guys. I think the difference was bigger than it appears on the records.
The Love Forever Changes album would not exist if it didn't have Brian McLean's Alone Again Or. The whole album is built not so much upon that foundation, but upon the door that song, which is a great song, created so that people could walk through it into the rest of Arthur and the band's cosmology.
I heard a funny thing. Somebody said to me, you know that I could be in love with almost everyone. I think that people are the greatest fun. And I will be alone again tonight, my dear.
Starting with the rippling guitars, going into a bridge, and suddenly this crescendo of horns and strings, and then a flight of fancy on a bullfight Corita trumpet, which is off wailing on top of everything else.
Bud Brisbois. He was a wonderful trumpet player, and I'm really glad he did it. He had 3 fingers on this hand, so he had no thumb, I think, and no little finger. So he was a perfect trumpet player.
That's one of those moments I would love to have been in the studio, but I was just knocked out when I heard it. But it was so unexpected from the band. No LA band had done this, and there they were off again. I thought that was wonderful.
I've never heard any other group reach that level of art. I mean, the Beatles were a wonderful combination, and they had the right stuff. You know, everybody had their role, and they did it right. But as far as a group that just created a kind of abstract rock art, I've never heard anything like this group and that album.
When I heard it in the studio, you know, in full blown with the orchestra and everything, it just really knocked me out. And I thought everybody else would hear it the same way, you know, because you're adding rock and roll or really blistering guitar runs with flamenco, or on top of something that's rather avant-garde. And that was different. I don't think until that point there had been an album done like that. I was pleased with that from the start. I know Arthur was kind of, I don't know, maybe a little ambivalent, but I heard it differently.
The album itself did not really get a lot of notoriety at the time. There wasn't too much controversy about it.
I think it did fairly well. Not hugely well. I don't know the numbers. I'd have to go back and look at my old royalty statements to see if we ever broke even.
Didn't make a big splash, And I mean, frankly, I don't know if maybe I listened to it and went, yeah. And then later, picked it up a few more times and went, oh my God, look what I missed here. Wow.
It wasn't the music, it wasn't the album that caused it not to be accepted. All it needed to do was to be in the right stores, in the right communities, and given the proper promotion. And it would have done what it was supposed to do.
Commercially, it did fairly well. After all, the only way you could see Love was come to California because they weren't going to go anywhere else, which for me was very frustrating because it never had occurred to me that a band that had played so energetically in Los Angeles would not go outside of Los Angeles. They needed to go out and be with that album. People needed to see them. And they weren't available.
Arthur was our booking agent, essentially. People would call him and say, are you guys interested in working on such and such a date? And he would accept or reject that offer. It may have been a part of the plan. It may have been that he just didn't feel like working. I don't know. But that's the double-edged sword. He was an extremely creative individual who could write, who could sing, who could do it all. But he really wasn't interested in working a lot.
I was kind of spaced in those days. You know what I mean? Sometimes if I go to work and the street light, like it says, wait, stop, and go, if the green signal didn't wink at me, I wouldn't go to work. I've been out there in my day.
Arthur just didn't play ball. To me, that was his downfall. There's times to play ball. He got chances to do, like I say, tours with major people, TV shows and spots, and if it wasn't top billing, he just turned it down flat.
You're asking me questions that I question myself. Why weren't we as big as the Beatles? One is because I didn't cooperate. And the other is, I'm not gonna go and eat shit on the road like these flunkies, but now I see that, look what Jim Morrison did. He didn't look where he is. Janis Joplin did. I used to have to sit at the Fillmore. Cheers. I used to have to sit always drink twice as much water as you do wine, or 3 times as much. I think it helps flesh out your physicalness, or your kidneys, and your liver, right? I headlined over the Grateful Dead, what are those other, Moby Grape, those other ones, what's Janis Joplin's band called?
Big Brother and
Holding Company. We headlined over all those people. At one point, I had to tell the people, hey, look, my name is underneath this other band. And I refused to play until they changed the marquee. It's not that I'm an egomaniac, it's that I know what I'm doing in music.
I got Arthur to come to New York, supposedly for 2 or 3 days. I hoped that maybe if he came to New York and we took him through the club scene and stuff, he'd catch a little of the disease, but he didn't. In fact, he left a day early. He just couldn't stand to be away from Los Angeles.
Those are basically I had a good thing going on the West Coast, and actually, to tell you the truth, I was afraid to go somewhere else because I didn't know how it would be received. I know I had it sewed up here. It's cool. I can live here and I can make a living here. But to go to New York and to play and those other places, I was just out, 19 years old, mate. 20 years old. I didn't know. I didn't know, man. I mean, I didn't know it's all the same. I didn't know that doing this interview, looking at you all, is just like looking at a mirror, looking at me. There's nothing to be afraid of.
The back of the Forever Changes album was a shot that was taken by Ronnie here, and we gathered at Arthur's house up at the top of Kirkwood. Johnny had a joint going, which you can see in the picture. As we were jockeying for position, my foot brushed against the Spanish vase that was that Arthur had on the deck there, and it fell over and broke. And so Arthur reached down and picked it up and said, "Okay, take the picture." Some people have said it signaled the breakup of the original group, the death of the whole thing, the hippie era.
I mean, it was obvious that through that album that they wouldn't be there at the end of the album because of what we had gone through, the emotional upheaval. It was really gut-wrenching what they went through, even for Arthur.
Everybody was a bit depressed, but I think Arthur was even more so affected by it. And he talked about death quite a bit and thought that he was just going to die. But I think a lot of that had to do with just being tired, because of all the changes that were happening, Forever Changes, the knowing that this was going to be it as far as this particular group is concerned, and that things were going to be different. It was never going to be the way it was.
You have to forgive, I do believe, in order to be forgiven. See, because people make mistakes, but people have choices to make. And when you're at the crossroads, sometimes you go on the wrong path. For an example, me and my mates, me and my group, we went to a motel to score some drugs. Well, I like this type of drug, it gives me sort of a lift, and they like this sort of a drug that puts them asleep. And it was like, I went that way and they went that way. And the band went that way.
The hard drugs were something that I believe that we all had to deal with, but we didn't all do it at the same time. We were staggered in our involvement with heroin, which is the most limiting of all drugs.
I went the wrong way as well. Up, down, whatever. When you're born drug-free. Unless your parents were strung out or something like that. You're born drug-free. And you're having a great time. You're running around, carrying on. You don't need this to do that. You don't need this to do that.
It was something to help us deal and cope with the realities of what was going on. Something that you'd worked so hard and so long for, and now you see it just leaving, and you can't do anything about it. And you're depressed, and so you self-medicate. And you self-medicate and keep on, and pretty soon you chase the dragon until the dragon catches you. And that's what we all did. But it wasn't a point of the drugs causing the problems. The drugs were after the problems were already there, and then the drugs were used just to try and to cope with them.
In January of '68, we went back into the studio and recorded Your Mind and We Belong Together and Laughing Stock. So it was just a side A and a side B of what might someday be another album. When I first heard those words, I keep building my hopes up, you keep tearing them down. You know, I understood, I think, what Arthur was trying to say. You know, I think that what he was trying to do was express his frustration at trying to do things in that group that he wasn't able to do. And I think Brian has started to feel the same way about himself. He had wanted to begin doing his own thing as well.
By the time the records came out, my thinking had already moved on. I couldn't sit back and enjoy listening to it because I was just thinking I can do better, I can do so much better. This can sound so much better. And that's part of the reason I went off onto my own. Unfortunately, neither Arthur or I were as good apart as we were together.
When you're not successful or you're trying to make it, you're like a family, like, you know, brothers. But as soon as you make it, the outside interests start pulling you toward them. And everybody has these little cliques, and they'll say, oh man, you're the greatest. And then Brian has people that says, oh man, you're the greatest, you carry the group. Arthur has people that says, you're the fantastic one, you carry the group. Kenny has people that are telling him that. So everybody has these interests that are pulling at them, telling them they're the ones that are causing the success. And if you're not very secure, if you're young, if you have other things pulling at you, sometimes you listen to those people and they just pull you away, you know, and you can't make music with all of those different influences affecting you. You just can't do it. So you start out with these wonderful idealistic ideas about what you're going to do with music, and then money and people and jaded and jealousies and all of those things interfere with it, and then where's the music?
And I'm lost in confusions, 'cause my things are material, and you don't know how much I love you.
In 1968, in May, we broke up. 68. We held a meeting and said, this is it, we're through. Everybody was on heroin, nobody could hold up their end. We were all shot.
You know, every instrument, all I had to do was sign my name, mate, and they'd give me Vox amplifiers, they'd give me Marshall stacks, and as soon as I get them, these guys would pawn them. I couldn't take that shit anymore, you know? I had to move on, and the people, when I moved on in 67, 68, 69 actually. Late 68, 69, George Saranovich, Frank Fayad, Jay Lewis, Gary Rawls. They couldn't stand Forever Changes. They were more into rhythm and blues. They were white guys, but they were more into funk and rhythm and blues than they were into listening to Forever Changes and the words and things that I was saying. So I said, wow, maybe I made a flop. For years that Forever Changes because of my environment. That's a piece of crap. You know what I mean? And I'm easily influenced. So I said, well, hell, I know how to play what you guys like to play too, so I wrote songs in that vein.
We did one more album with Arthur, For Sale, but the heart had gone out of it, and you could tell.
Do you think the heart had gone out of Arthur a little bit? Because
I don't know. I would assume so because the talent was always there. The question was whether he wanted to apply himself or not.
You know, I think that sometimes we're put on this planet to do a particular thing in a particular time space. And maybe when we've said what we were put here to do, that's it. And maybe Arthur's space really were those 3 albums. And what he did after that, he was trying to find why he did it to begin with. And it's very hard. The only way you can do that is to forget about it and allow the pail to fill up again so that you can draw from it.
After the 4th album, we released him from his agreement so he could record elsewhere. We wanted to see him succeed. The albums didn't succeed. But then again, it was Arthur and another whole group of musicians.
Once I had a singing group and gone. Now I got another group, didn't take too long.
I'd be lying if I didn't get some satisfaction from saying when I would read reviews and they would be called ham-fisted imposters or this kind of thing. But, you know, I knew what Arthur was doing. He was trying to carry forth with an idea.
I don't think that much talent just dissipates. I don't go with that theory. I think circumstance got in the way. He probably wasn't given an opportunity like that again. And maybe that's what happened later, that not everyone understood that he could have gone on. You know, sometimes that can happen to someone with power, is that if they can't use it, they lose it, and maybe that's what happened.
I've had a lot of fun, man, you know? But I've had a lot of fun the hard way. I've learned to survive in places that I thought I would never even want to go to, let alone be a participant. They have a new slavery now, it's called penitentiary. It's new slavery, you know, where they arrest everything that's poor and everything that's black and poor whites and a lot of Mexicans. Those people don't care about going to jail. It's a second home to them. Me, I have a job to do, man. All you hear about all day long is motherfucker this, motherfucker that. You motherfucker, I'll kill you, motherfucker, this, that, and the other. How I pulled this robbery, how I did this murder, how I did... Man, I don't want to hear that. I want to play my music and please people on this earth, man. You know what I mean? Leave me the fuck alone. That's all I ask. Leave me the fuck alone.
Well, all of God's children's gotta have their freedom.
It took me 5.5 years to open a door, just to turn the doorknob to be able to go in and out of somewhere. So I said freedom is a luxury.
Really? I got a cell phone call, and just from a cell phone. Hey man, Jay Chap, this is Arthur. So I want to put the band back together.
He was really hungry, really ready to play music.
You know, you could see he was happy, and you know, it was a great thing, and all this came together at a kind of a magical time for him.
Then Gene Kraut said, well, let's get together. Let's do that album live.
People were crying when Arthur walked on stage, and it was different for us, you know, to see.
Where are you going? I see you walking. Have you been there before?
Just an amazing experience once we walked out, lights went down, and it just, you know, those violins started sawing.
Did you take them home? There's a private in my boat, and he wears his instead of mantles on his coat.
Nobody gets on stage and gives as much as that guy can give when he really wants to. He's the greatest performer in the world.
The music was beautiful. Arthur was on.
Yeah, we felt like we were partaking in something very special and sacred.
She'll bring you water. If she don't, then you will You go through changes, it may seem strange, it's what you're put here for. You think you're happy and you are happy, that's what you're happy for. There's a man who can't decide if he should fight for what his father thinks is right. There are people wearing crowns to screw you up, but they would
this house pays tribute to the legendary Arthur Lee, also known as Arthur Lee, frontman and inspiration of Love, the world's greatest rock band and creators of Forever Changes, the greatest album of all time. Notes that following his release from jail, he is currently touring Europe and urges honourable and especially right honourable members to consider the potential benefit to their constituents if they were, with the indulgence of their whips, to lighten up and tune in to one of his forthcoming British gigs.
Best album of all time, from Parliament to Parliament. They stopped what they were doing with the whatever they were talking about and said, go see Arthur Lee. That's flattering. They're human beings, man. I didn't understand it, man. I wanted to drink like a fish needed water, but I didn't. I had a Guinness, you know what I mean? And it's like, they really treated me with royal respect.
Arthur Lee, yeah.
I've been blessed in my life, man. I had a dream when I was a child, asked to be a certain person. But then I found out, you can be a lot of these different people. You can be an athlete, you can be a scientist. I chose music, But that was a long time ago. What do I choose today? It was inevitable because I still choose the same thing. I get a nut on that stage, you know what I mean? I see people in the audience. I see little kids. I see teenagers. I see people in their 20s and 30s. I see middle-aged people. I see old people, and they're all there to see Love and Arthur Lee. That was my goal.
What happened at Beto Lido's was special. And it carried through the first album, which is really just a collection of songs, including some very good ones. It moved into the more experimental da capo, and then it burst forth in full bloom in Forever Changes. That's a hell of a run.
This change, and for everyone who thinks that life is just a game, do you like the part you're playing?
You don't want to steal from anyone, but the phrase, it's been a long, strange trip. It has been for us. It's been a long, strange trip. And all of the negative and all of the good, I wouldn't trade one moment of it.
It's the street band that won't die. The corpse. It's like the vampire of rock. Every once in a while, the corpse, sits up and emits sound and walks. I keep thinking it's over, and it keeps resurrecting.
Arthur was a unique voice as a storyteller, melodically. Love was unique. I mean, if they weren't, you wouldn't be sitting here today asking me these questions.
I would say I was proud to be part of it, but it isn't pride, it's gratitude. Gratitude that I was chosen. Forever is a good word for that group.
This is the time in life that I'm living, and I'll face each day with a smile. For the time that I've been given such a little while, and the things that I must do consist of more than style. There'll be time for you to start all over. This is the time, and this is the time, and it is time.
When you drop out and drop in and drop out and drop by, it's kind of hard. But then when your record gets rated over the Beatles and the Stones and everybody, then you realize, wow, your work wasn't in vain, you know what I mean? It took them a long time to listen to my music, man. I'm still waiting for that day, the Hall of Fame and all that.
Rather than fight you, I'll give you my bell. And then you can ring it and go fare thee well. And the leaves don't fall in my grandfather's grave, 'cause the trees have been replaced with city buildings. Gather round people as fast as you can. I'm gonna tell another story about an animal called man. Well, he struts all around with his tailor-made suits, but his mind is all filled up with bullshit. Singing and filling this place. I'd like to be in a lifetime that you can't erase. If you don't like my story, then don't buy my songs, 'cause I wouldn't want you to listen